So after you have analyzed your prompt, but before you get to writing your outline, there's still a big important chunk of information that your outline requires you to have before you get started. You need to develop your big ideas and the purpose for your writing. By the time you have completed this tutorial, you will understand the difference between the literary analysis that we're completing versus the personal responses to text that we've been doing prior to this. You're also going to understand the purpose of your writing and what you have to do in your writing. And then finally, completing the purpose section of your outline. So we spend the tutorial figuring this stuff out. So at first glance, you might think that all the work that you've done in personal response to text has kind of gone to waste, but that's not true. To remember this on the board. It's important to recognize that the work that you've done in personal response to text can and should be used in the work that you're going to do in literary analysis. Hopefully by the end of this tutorial, you will understand the difference. But in the meantime, in the personal response, you learned how to identify how the text creates to you personally, and as a result, how the text affects you. When writing a critical response, you still need to identify the effect of the text on the reader. Audience, you, but you refer to the reader in third person. Then you identify how the author accomplishes this effect through various literary elements and devices. In order to make the transition from your personal to your critical writing, it is important to recognize the difference between the personal response to text and the literary analysis. First, if you look at the personal response to text, I write about my feelings, my thoughts, my experiences as a response to the text and related to my own interpretations. In the literary analysis, however, I write about the way the author uses literary elements and devices to represent ideas to the audience in order to accomplish this. My interpretations are plausible interpretations that most of the audience will make as a result of the writing. Second, when I write a personal response to text, I write in a style and voice that is appropriate to the prose form I've chosen. Remember, there's plenty of prose forms you can choose. In a literary analysis, however, I write, and I have to write, in an academic style and use a formal voice. Next, I need to recognize that when I write a personal response to text, I write about the effect of the text on me and my ideas. I try to understand how my personal experiences change the way I understand the text. However, in a literary analysis, I use that understanding of how the text affects me to identify the way the text affects the audience. Finally, it is important to recognize a significant difference in the purpose of my writing between both. In the personal response to text, I have to examine and explain and defend my own personal reaction to the text. But in the literary analysis, I have to examine, explain, and defend the creator's purpose and intent in writing through an analysis of the text. I have to evaluate the means, or the literary elements and devices that the author uses in order to accomplish his or her purpose. And I have to figure out how well he's done it or she's done it. Okay, it's time to return to your outline and complete the section on identifying your purpose and central idea of writing. Your template already gives you a general purpose. It's been filled in for you. You don't have to expand on this in any way. The idea is that you recognize the purpose of a literary analysis is different than the purpose of a personal response to text. Keep in mind what your purpose is the entire time you're writing. Remember that your specific purpose is to argue something. Literary analysis is an argument. So you start with to persuade my listeners that. To fill the rest of it in, you need to ask yourself questions like, do I know what the creator's purpose and intent was in the writing? What were they trying to do when they presented this symbol, or perhaps what were they trying to do when the plot unfolded this way instead of a different way. Looking deeply at the text in the literary element or device that you're trying to analyze according to is an important part of developing this specific purpose. And then finally you have to ask, did they do it well? When you record the central idea, what you're looking for is the theme of the text that you're talking about. What is the idea that the author is trying to provide to his or her reader? Okay, so let's take a moment and look at the differences between the way we word a specific purpose versus the central idea of what we're trying to convey. The specific purpose is worded to persuade the reader of my essay, so to persuade, that's the purpose of my essay, that Christopher Marlowe effectively used figurative language in Heart of Darkness to portray the hollowness of humanity. So I want you to look at a few pieces here. I mentioned the author. I also mentioned the effective use or not effective use of a literary element or a literary device. I talk about the title of the piece that I'm actually looking at, and then I have a very basic, simple idea of what the story is about in a few words or less. By the time I move to the central idea, civilization is a superficial mass created by fear of the law and public shame. I need to recognize that when I get to the point where I'm pulling my details and my supporting evidence, that the central idea that the evidence should be supporting is that. Let's try looking at another one. The specific purpose, to persuade the reader of my essay that Lewis Carroll used the characterization of Alice in Alice in Wonderland in order to effectively expose the extremities of experiences within the coming of age. I've talked about who the author is, I've talked about the title, I've talked about characterization. I've also talked about the characterization of who I'm going to look at, and I've talked about the main kind of central idea within the text of the idea that the author is trying to convey. The central idea is from litcharts.com, but it says Alice in Wonderland can be taken as a kind of exaggerated metaphor for the experience of growing up, both in terms of physically growing up and coming to understand the world of adults and how that world differs from the child's expectation of it. This is the idea that I'm conveying. This is the idea that I believe Lewis Carroll is actually conveying through this characterization. Finally, let's return to your original outline and start filling yours in. The specific purpose is to persuade, because you're talking about an argument, the reader of my essay that, put in your author, in our case, Shakespeare, has, and then you have to decide whether or not he's done it well or he hasn't done it well. You have to make a judgment. Effective used, and then talk about the literary element or the device that he's using. To, and then provide a strong verb. I've provided a list of strong verbs in our website, and then add a summary of the idea. So it's just a rewording of the idea that you're going to focus on. And then finally, when you get to your central idea, what is the idea that you need to show? A hint, refer to your prompt.